Welcome once again. This is the RA Enhancements Phase 1, and my name is Cynthia Hinman, and we have other SMEs on the phone, but in order to save time, I think I'm going to skip that and just get started to make sure we can get through on the phone. All right, this initiative covers 3 enhancements. It covers refinements to the existing planned outage process, a minimum state of charge requirement for storage resources, and also backstop procurement authority for local energy sufficiency. We're going to be covering the first 2 of these in this training. The third one is going in fall, so we're going to wait on that one. We have a list of acronyms here that you can use. And by the way, this presentation is currently posted on our website. And an updated version of it is going to be posted after the training because I made a few edits for clarity, as well as the recording. Once we get it, that will be posted as well. So you're going to have the full recording. We are, the phases of this project, there's more than one, because we call this phase 1, and it went to the board in March, and it was approved by the Board of Governors, and it included the 3 initiatives that I spoke of earlier. There's also a couple other phases going forward in July and November, phase 2A and phase 2B. I'll give you a second to take a look at those. They will be in the presentation if you, that will be on the website, so let's move along. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is resource adequacy capacity substitution, which you may know as the planned outage substitution. After I'm done with this section, Radha Madrigal is going to talk about the storage initiative part of this. So we'll start out with this one. The key features of this is that all planned outages for RA resources must bring full substitute capacity for an outage to be approved, and requested outage extensions require a new outage card and substitute capacity if the outage is started. We're going to talk about these in depth because I have scenarios that cover each one of these things. The benefits of this are that it provides clarity regarding planned outage requirements for RA capacity. It's clear you need to have 100% substitution for your planned outages. It ensures that the ISO has adequate RA capacity to maintain reliability, even when resources can't return to service as they're originally planned. And also, it's very focused and easily implementable by this summer. It is an interim solution that we have, and we are developing a long-term solution in our stakeholder processes as they go forward. So I'm going to go through a number of scenarios. We're going to go through 3 scenarios, and then I'm going to stop for questions. So let's do that. The first scenario is where you have a planned outage. And the planned outage was submitted by 30 days before the RA month with a substitute resource. So in our example, SCA has a resource with an RA obligation of 20 megawatts, and they submit a supply plan in SERA 45 days in advance of the RA month. So all is good there. They have a 20 megawatt planned outage. SCA will submit an outage request in OMS by 30 days before the RA month. Additionally, they're going to submit a substitute resource that covers 100% of the RA impact in SERA within 24 hours after 30 days before the RA month. Now, the 30 days before the RA month is significant because that's the last day to update your supply plan. So you need to submit a substitute resource within 24 hours of that deadline that covers 100% of the RA impact. And if so, the ISO validates the substitution that's been provided, and that substitute has been approved. We're going to move on to scenario 2. Scenario 2 has exactly the same scenario, except it doesn't have a substitute resource. And I'm just letting you know that that outage would be denied. There needs to be an outage, 100% substitution for your planned outage. Furthermore, if you submit a partial substitution for your planned outage, as in Resource C, they have a planned outage, 20 megawatts. They submit that outage request right on 30 days, by 30 days before the RA month in OMS, and they also submit that substitute resource, but it only covers 90% of the RA impact, meaning the amount of that outage that is contributed to RA. And the ISO validates that, but that outage is going to be denied because you need to cover 100% of your planned outage, or of the RA impact of your planned outage, I should say. So those are three of our basic scenarios. So at this point, Michelle, I'd like to stop for questions.
All right. So are we going to take any questions over the phone today?
Yes.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, pressing #2 will enter you into the question queue if you would like to ask a question via phone. Otherwise, you can drop your question in the chat box and make sure you address it to everyone. So a reminder, #2 will enter you into the verbal question queue. All right, I do see a couple of questions in queue. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Good morning. This is Rayanne Quadro from Gridwell Consulting.
Hello.
I'm wondering if you can provide the implementation date for the substitution requirements. Is it in effect for outages starting July 1st or another date?
Can one of my subject matter experts unmute and answer that question?
Yeah, this is Abdul. Yes, it's going to be targeting the RA month of July. So the implementation will go in production beginning of June for the runs, for these validation runs that are targeting the month of the RA month of July.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. It looks like we do have additional question in queue.
Okay.
Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Hello, is that me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Nancy Lee with the City of Anaheim. I have a question. What if we have planned outages within the 30 days? I mean, it could be tomorrow, the unit, because due to fire. So what happens if we cannot substitute that? Is that still count as penalty?
So that sounds like, and my experts can help me out here, but that sounds like if it was one day, that would be a forced outage and not a planned outage.
Yeah, it's a forced outage.
This is planned outage substitution. So does anybody else want to jump in here?
Yeah, there are no changes to the forced outage process, substitution, penalties. None of that is impacting the forced outages. This is the changes here are only for planned outages.
Okay. So on the forced outages, there's no penalty, correct?
It depends on the nature of work. Some forced outages, some nature of work are subject to penalties and substitution, and some do not have penalties and substitution if they are exempt. Depends on the nature of work.
What do you mean by the nature of work? Let's just say it's due to the fire.
So
I think
what
I mean is
go ahead.
Go ahead, Cynthia.
No. Finish what you're going to say, Abdul.
Okay, well, what we're talking about is the existing process. So the existing process, when you submit an outage in OMS, you have to pick the nature of work for that outage. And depending on the nature, with specific list of nature of work types, planned maintenance, environmental restrictions, transmission-induced generation outages, there's different types. They're all listed in OMS. So these are like the requirements BPM will tell you which one is subject to substitution and therefore rate, and which ones are not.
Right. So I again, to reiterate, I would recommend that you look at the BPM, the outage BPM, if you want to find out more about the nature of work and what that is.
Yeah, and it's very gray area. That's why I'm asking right now because because let's just say that I have two generations that both in fire, so of course I can't substitute anything. So I'm asking, because of the nature of the fire in California, in that case, is the penalty waived or not? That's all. My question is. Just
this is Abdul again. I think I get the question. I don't think it's a related training. So my suggestion is, if you can work with your client rep to get us a city ticket, or they can connect you with us directly. But I think we can discuss this offline. I don't think it's this training is related to that, fires and what are the consequences of these fires.
Yep. Thank you, Abdul. That's a great point. If you can submit a city ticket about that, that's a little out of scope for what we're talking about in this presentation. We're the forced outage issue, the way that we handle them has not changed. And so if you have a question about that, why don't you submit a city ticket and your client rep will get an answer for you. All right?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We do have an additional question in the queue.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
All right. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Hi, this is Tom Green with Boston Energy. So when you're saying you have to put in a new OMS ticket for an extension, so that would be basically that would go in. Typically, you don't know you need to extend until within a couple of days, so that would switch it from a plant forced, and then you'd be under the RAIN instead of resource adequacy, correct?
So if you're talking about if you have a planned outage and you have a substitution and you realize toward the end of it that you're going to need to extend the outage, then you're going to need to submit another outage request. And we're going to go through an example of that in a bit. Submit another outage request for the additional days and have a substitution for that as well. Substitute resource.
Wouldn't be forced then? If you're submitting it, say, they call and say, I need to end by, my outage is supposed to end in 2 days, you're within that 7-day window, I would think the new ticket would be forced then. Is that not correct?
This is Abdul. Yeah, it would be forced if you submit it with 2 days. It's going to be considered forced, and therefore you should only submit the extension if you have to extend it. Basically, if you cannot finish the work at a later date, or if you right. So if you need to continue the outage, and you cannot finish as planned on the time frame, then you'll have to submit a new outage, and it depends on when you submit it. It could be planned or it could be forced, as the timelines that we have today. 9 days, 8 days in advance versus 7 days in advance.
So, Abdul, I'd like to add on to that just a little bit with the idea of remember that there are benefits in both scenarios of providing the outage substitution to the extent that the extension comes in and as initially logged as forced. Providing that substitute capacity will help you avoid RAIN charges, and that substitute capacity is also required if you get that notice in in a timely manner such that it can come in as planned. But either way, the procurement of substitute capacity helps you avoid potential penalties from the ISO.
Okay. And then if you get a notice of an outage that's, you know, less than the 30 days before a month, but, you know, still is going to be a planned outage, is that still handled the same way through Sierra, where you do the substitute in there versus the supply plan? I'm assuming it
is. Yes. The difference is basically we're just trying to explain that from a timeline point of view. So if it's a planned outage, you submit the substitution to Sierra. It's when the time starts ticking or the clock starts ticking. Because I see a question in the chat here. Someone is asking if they submit an outage at T-60. So what we're saying is if any outage you submit before T-30 or by T-30, so you submit 100 days before the month or 30 days before the month, that 24-hour clock won't start clicking or ticking until we run the first validation at T-29. 8 p.m. T-29, we'll run the first validation. And for all outages that have been submitted up to that point, they will get consumed. Then their timer will start, and they'll have until the next day before 8 p.m. So T-28, at T-28, before we run the next validation at 8 p.m., we're going to check did everyone substitute or not. Those who did not substitute will get their outage denied. So that's when the 24-hour timer will start. If you submit an outage after T-30, anytime you submit the outage through the end of the month, that outage will be consumed in the next run as soon as the next run happens to be, which could be, you know, the same day or the next day. It depends on if you submit the outage before 8 p.m. or after 8 p.m. And then after we consume it and we in that run, in the next immediate following run, that's when your 24-hour will start ticking, which will end the next day. So if you submit an outage at T-27 at 9 a.m., now the T-27 8 p.m. run already happened. So we're not going to consume it until T-26 at 8 a.m. We're going to consume that outage. And the timer will start. So now you have till T-25. I lost track of what I said. Did I say T-26? I think I said T-26
yeah.
to consume it. So yeah, okay. So yeah, sorry. T-25, 8 a.m. Before 8 a.m., we're going to check did you fully substitute or not. So that's what we're trying to say. So on-the-go submissions, they'll get consumed as soon as possible, and then your timer will start. Anything that has been submitted in advance, you don't have to substitute all the way till we start running the validation. And that's your clock won't start ticking until we start running the validation at T-29.
All right.
And we're going to go through some of these examples that Abdul just went through. So and Abdul, thank you. It looks like you answered a lot of the questions in the written chat as well in your answer. So, Michelle, are there other questions on the phone?
I currently do not see any additional questions in queue, but as a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, to get into queue for our next Q&A session, you can press #2 on your telephone keypad.
All right. Well, let's go through a few more scenarios, and then we'll stop for questions again. How about that? So what if you have a planned outage and it's submitted after T30? I think somebody had that question. So in this example, this SCD has a planned outage that was submitted 28 days before the RA month. So it's after that T30 deadline that we've been talking about. They submitted a substitute resource covering 100% of the RA impact in Sierra within 24 hours of the first RA substitute capacity validation run after the outage was submitted. That's a lot of words, and I'm going to unpack that for you in the next slide. So within 24 hours, and this is something that Abdul talked about as well, that outage would be approved, but let's talk about that. So the RA capacity substitution validation run is at 8 in the morning each day, as Abdul mentioned. In this example, the scheduling coordinator submits a planned outage at 9 in the morning on Monday. So the validation run for Monday has already happened. So they're going to hit the validation run that occurs at 8 a.m. on Tuesday. And then they have 24 hours after that. So their substitution deadline for submitting that planned outage at 9 a.m. on Monday would be 8 a.m. on Wednesday. So the point here is the substitution deadline is no less than 24 hours, but no more than 47 hours. Stop for questions. I think we already had questions on that, but we'll see if that needs any additional clarification. Michelle?
All right, we do have a few questions in queue. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Hi, this is Michael Bolpit from PG&E. I had a question regarding NGRs. I was wondering if you're going to create a list of either exemptions or special cases, because these resources you can't put overlapping OMS cards in, so even the case of substitution and extension of a planned outage, you wouldn't be able to have two cards in at the same time. So I was just wondering if you're going to provide some guidance on that.
Abdul, can you help out with that one?
Yeah. So I know we have a current limitation with NGRs that you can't have overlapping outages on them, but I'm not understanding how this policy would do that. Can you please clarify what?
Well, I mean, in the earlier segment, you said that if a planned outage needed to be extended, the SC would just put in an additional OMS card under the forest category if you had a planned outage. So the NGR could not do that.
Well, it would be a new outage card for that. Oh, sorry, go ahead. I thought you were done.
Well, because there's an existing planned outage card, and to create another outage card would not be possible on an NGR resource.
Okay.
Are you talking about extending an outage?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, since it's an extension, that means your planned outage is going to end. So the scenario we're talking about is, let's say you submitted a planned outage a long time ago, and that planned outage was happening April 20th, and it was April 21. That's what you did. Now today you realize, the work is not done, and I need 2 more days. What we're saying is, so now you want to extend your outage through April 22 and 23. What we're saying is you can't submit an extension on that original existing planned outage. Instead, we would want you to submit, and that's, by the way, because the outage has started already. If the outage hasn't started, you can extend it. But because it has started already, you need to submit a new outage. Or in the day after, the outage is not covering the day. There's no outages for you, and you would have to submit a new outage card for the period. So you will have only 1 outage card per day in this case, in this example.
So I'm not sure I caught all that, but are you saying that you would wait until the planned outage would finish, the original planned outage, and then when the extension portion started, you would enter the new card, even if you knew about it a week in advance?
No, you should submit the outage as soon as you know about it. So if you learn about it a week in advance, submit you just need to submit a new outage card for the extension period. So the period that you're extending, They won't have an
With an NGR, you can.
Abdul, this is Diana. Just to clarify, you're not allowed to enter 2 outages at the same time for an NGR that affect the PMAX.
Right.
Yeah, but we'll have two outages at the same time because one will end and a new one will start.
They would have different
I'm
dates.
talking about the SD entering the card.
I think we're going to have to, can you submit a city ticket on that one and we can get an answer for you and we'll send the answer to everyone as well once we have that. So what I understand is that an NGR can't submit an outage when you already have an outage. That's what I think I'm hearing. And is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. Well, actually, I'll write that down. We'll get an answer for that. And we'll send it out to everybody. Sorry, I'm writing. All right.
All right.
And we'll get back to you on that one, okay? Are there other questions, Michelle?
Yes, we do have other questions in queue. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Hi, this is Noah. I'm from Middle River Power. Wanted to ask about the 48-hour limitation that you guys referenced, and I'm just reading the tariff which talks about the no more than 72 hours after the 30-day supply plan revision deadline. Can you talk about the difference between the 72 that's in the tariff versus the 48 that you have referenced?
The tariff 72, you know, the tariff is the upper limit, is the max 72 hours, and what we're talking about is our implementation plan and what we're going to put in the BPM, which reminds me, I think I saw someone asked about the BPM. The BPM we're getting for approval as we speak, and we should be posting the draft in the PR process soon.
So what you're saying is the ISO is implementing the 48 because it is sort of technically within the no more than 72 hour that's in the tariff.
Exactly, yes. It's 24 hours, but depending on when you submit the outage, it could go all the way to 47 hours and change. If you submit the outage right after we start the validation run.
Right, okay. And then can you talk about what happens if, for outages submitted after T30, if, within that 48-hour time period, if substitute capacity cannot be provided, what should the SC do after the 48-hour period? Should they resubmit the outage in an attempt to continue to get substitute capacity or something else?
You mean they resubmit the outage even though they don't have substitute capacity, hoping that they would secure it before the end of the new timer?
Yeah, exactly. If there's some daylight, right, between the time when an outage is denied because of lack of substitution versus when the outage may start to, may start. It could be like 3 weeks, let's say. What if within that 3 weeks, if it's possible to get substitute capacity, what should the SC do with regards to this information to the ISO? Should they continue to report it and submit it as a planned outage request? While trying to work on it, or something else?
They can submit. Sorry, I dropped the mic. No, I don't see it. But, not really, but they can submit the outage and hoping that they secure capacity, substitute capacity in time, or they can wait until they actually have the substitute capacity and then submit the planned outage. And I think that's some of the policy is to submit this capacity with the planned outage. I think we just did that 24-hour just to give us time to run validation and to give people to actually hit the button and submit. So, you know, if you want to submit a planned outage, make sure you have RA capacity, RA substitute capacity. So I would say in this scenario, get the substitute capacity and the outage, the planned outage. Otherwise, we're just going to deny it again.
Okay, so it's okay then to continue to submit the planned outage, or it's also, from what I'm hearing from you, is it's also okay to wait to notify the ISO of the planned outage until a time in which we have procured the substitute capacity. And if we are unable to and we still need to take the outage as forced, that's a different discussion.
Right. Yeah, that's my understanding.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Noah. Because of our delay in starting, we're running a little short on time. So I'm going to run through some more of these scenarios, and then we'll stop for questions again. And I see all your questions in the chat, and we'll make sure that even if we don't answer them on the phone, we'll take a snapshot of them and we'll get you the answers. So let's continue on. So in the fifth scenario, this is where you have multiple resources to substitute for one outage. So you submit your planned outage, and SCE, then not SCE, but example SCE, offers 3 resources to cover 100% of the RA impact in Sierra. So resource 1 was 10 megawatts, resource 2 was 7 megawatts, and resource 3 covered 3 megawatts. So the point here is that you can have multiple resources as substitutions, but it has to be specific. You have to identify the resource and the number of megawatts of the outage that they are covering. If you do that, then your outage will be approved. We've had a lot of questions about extending an outage, so here's an example. Resource F, SCF has a resource on outage that ends on September 21st, and they have a substitute resource. They find that they're going to need 3 additional days after September 21st, so they have to submit a new outage request in OMS through September 24th and submit a substitute resource in Sierra. In that case, that outage will be approved. The extension will be approved. So that's what you're going to need to do to extend a planned outage. I'm going to skip. Well, no, I'm going to skip this, and we're going to go through the last few scenarios, and then we'll stop for some questions. So the next 3 scenarios talk about outages that span more than 1 month. So in this first one, the planned outage is going to span January and February, and it's submitted after T30 for the second RA month, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So this SC submits their supply plan for January RA month, and they have a resource that they're going to be using for January and February. It turns out that they submit a planned outage request on January 5th, and that's going to span January 25th through February 5th. So it's within that last day to submit an outage or a supply plan for the February month. They submit a substitute resource that covers 100% of the RA impact for the dates, all the dates of the outage, and that is exactly what they need to do, and that outage is approved. Now let's change it a bit. I'm going to change a little bit of the scenario and the dates. So now they have a planned outage that's spanning more than a month, and they submit after T30 for the initial RA month. So the last example, they submitted that planned outage in January. Here, they're submitting the planned outage on December 14th, and it's going to span January 25th through February 5th. The outage will span that time period. In that case, the scheduling coordinator is going to submit a substitute resource for the period of the January period, January 25th through 21st, within 24 hours of that outage submission, which covering 100% of the RA impacted megawatts. And they also submit a substitute resource, could be the same substitute resource, for February 1st through February 5th for the February portion. And they have to do that within 24 hours after that T30 for the February RA month. And that has to cover 100% of the outage. If that is all done, then that outage is going to be approved. In the third scenario, actually there's 4 scenarios. I said there was 3. There's a planned outage that spans more than 1 month. It was submitted after T30 with a partial substitution. In this example, we have the same dates here. They submitted the planned outage on December 14th, and it spans the end of January through the beginning of February. They submit a substitute resource for 100% of January, but only 70% substitution for February. As you can imagine, that resource, that outage will be denied. They needed to have 100%. Having said that, there is one more scenario here. If they submit the planned outage before T30 with a partial substitution. So I'm going to go through this one slowly. The dates are a little different here. So we're still submitting for January and February. Now, in this case, the SC submits that planned outage on December 14th, which is within that less than 30 days for the January RA month. And the outage spans January 1st through February 5th. So this outage is starting earlier. In this example, a substitute resource for January for 100% is covered, and the substitute resource for February 1 through February 5th is submitted within 24 hours after T30 for the February RA month, and it's only 70%. In this case, we're not going to deny the outage because it's just continuing through, and that outage would be approved, but you would be subject to rain penalties in that example. So now I am going to stop for questions because I know that was a lot. Michelle?
All right, very good. We do have questions on the phone. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Hey, this is Anthony Dito, PG&E. I just want to add a little more detail to Michael Volpe's question regarding NGR resources. So for his example, let me draw it up for you. So let's just say it's July. There's an NGR resource with RA committed. Let's say it's 100 megawatts. The NGR resource is currently on planned outage through the 15th of July, derating the resource to 25% capacity. There's a transmission-induced outage starting July 16th through the 25th, derating the NGR to 50% capacity. Turns out the original active planned outage needs to be extended through the 30th. How is that done? How is the substitute submitted? What if there's no sub-capacity for the extension?
Hey, Anthony, this is Abdul. So I guess for that today, can you submit the extension? And so you would have 2 outages at the same time? I thought you can't do that for an NGR.
You cannot have overlapping outages on an NGR, regardless of nature of work.
Okay, so that means, so this is a current issue. Even today, in this scenario, if you needed to extend that work, you won't be able to do it because your transmission is starting right after the maintenance, correct?
Right. It's a current issue, but it's obviously going to grow much more complicated with these enhancements.
Okay. Okay, so now I finished that question, and I appreciate it. So I think we should probably back and discuss it internally and see if we can discuss it with the rest of it. Yeah. But thank you, Andrea.
All right. And
I appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank you. And again, we'll talk about that internally, and I'll send a response to all the folks who are on the call. Okay. All right. Other questions?
We do have additional questions in queue. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question. Caller, you may proceed. Your line is unmuted.
Yeah, I got my answer, my question answered earlier. Thank you. This is Anthony Augustine from DWR.
All right, very good. We are moving to the next question in queue. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Hi, this is Noah from Middle River. Can we go back to 7C? So I'm wondering, would the ISO provide a postal requirement for the portion in February when it runs the analysis, on, I guess, December 30th?
Yeah, Noah, so we'll, in this scenario, in this example, as soon as you submit the outage on December 14th, you'll see your substitution, or the timer will start for the substitution window for the January portion of the outage. So January 25th to January 30th, that 24 hours will start right after you submit your outage. Well, on the first validation run, after the first validation run, after you submit your outage, because the validation would have started already for January, right? In December 14th, we're already running January validations. So after you submit the outage, we're going to consume it, and we're going to start the timer for the January portion of the outage, which is January 25th to January 30th. And then for the February portion of the outage, the timer won't start until T-minus 29. The first validation runs, which is a run at T-minus 29, which I think is January 2nd or 3rd. That's when we run it, maybe January 3rd, I think. We run the first validation, and then your timer starts for the remaining portion of the outage, which is happening during February. So what this is saying is, if you substituted the first portion, but for the second portion you didn't fully substitute, we'll still deny the entire outage.
Wait, isn't that 7D? I guess I'm not understanding the difference between 7D and 7C.
There's different dates there, first of all. So go ahead.
So no, at 7D, what we're trying to do with 7D is we're trying to give an example of an outage that already started. So 7C, you didn't fully substitute the second portion. The outage has not started, so we went ahead and denied the entire outage, even though you substituted the January portion of the outage. In this example, 7D, the outage, you substituted the first portion, but when we started running the analysis, the validation for the February portion of the outage, which happens, again, roughly January 3rd, you didn't fully substitute for that portion. You gave only 70% of the substitution requirements for the February portion of the outage. But because the outage has already started on January 1st, we're not going to deny it, which is basically this example is trying to give the general rule that we have, which is if the outage already started, we're not going to deny it, even if substitution is not fully provided, and instead you're going to be subject to the rain penalties.
Okay. So can I then maybe let me ask the question differently with regards to 7C. For 7C, when the ISO runs its initial analysis and it does not know whether or not this resource is RA for February yet, would the ISO assign POSO only for the January portion and then at some later point assigning for the February portion after the supply plans come in? Or would it?
Yes.
Would the ISO assign it all together at once?
No, it's not going to be all together at once. It's going to be the first scenario we give, which is after we log the supply plan. The next day, then we check what's RA, what's not RA, and what's the impacted RA by the outages.
Okay, and then so in that case, whenever this outage is submitted, the ISO would first run the January outage or POSO, give 48 hours to provide substitution. If 100% is done, it's currently partially approved, I guess, until it gets to the February portion. And then for the February portion, if there's partial substitution and if the outage has not started in the sense that we're not in January 25th, right, then the ISO will then go back and deny the entire outage. I think that's what I got.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That's
cool. Okay,
yep.
Thanks.
All right. We do have another question in queue. If you would like to
we'll take
that now.
We'll take this question, and then we're going to continue moving on. And again, for those of you that are putting questions in chat, we'll make sure we get answers for those as well. Thank you.
All right, caller, you may go ahead. Caller, your line's unmuted. You may go ahead.
Hi, this is Jason Miller, PG&E. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I have a question related to the outage extension scenario. Basically, I'm wondering in a situation where we have a planned outage that is active and we know that we need to extend it, if we know that more than 8 days prior to kind of that end date and then it kicking off the extension date, we would go ahead and submit that as a planned outage, a new planned outage just for the extended portion, as I understand. Now, if we don't have adequate substitute capacity to cover that new extended card, I also understand that the outage would be denied. If we are, as an SC, if we're unable to procure enough substitute capacity to cover 100% of that substitution, would the next best option be to wait until we get inside the forced window and then submit that extension as a forced outage? Just trying to understand, how to navigate through planned, forced substitute capacity scenarios. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Abdul. So it's in this example, you could wait till you're in the forced window to submit a forced outage, but keep in mind you can do that only if you really, if the extension period is truly forced. Meaning, as an example, I'm just, I'm not putting a limitation on what forced outage is, but example is, let's say, you dismantle the unit for this planned work, and you cannot bring it back until the work is fully done, and the work cannot be done as planned in 10 days, but instead you need 2 more days to finish it. There's no way around it. So there's no way that you can finish the work on time or to bring the units back online and then finish the work on a different time. So, the other option is you say, okay, I can't extend it. I don't have substitution to provide for an extension period. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, leave the outage as is. When it ends, I'm going to bring my unit back online, and then I'm going to schedule another planned outage for a different date to finish my work. If you can do that, then you should do that. But if you cannot do that, because again, the unit has been, or some part has been taken out and it cannot be returned to service. I mean, use your judgment here, but basically what we're saying is a forced outage is an outage that you have to take whether the unit has broken or is in imminent danger of breaking, or in this case, because we blocked extensions, cannot be returned to service in time because the maintenance has started and it cannot be stopped. Then you can use that forced outage, in these scenarios. But otherwise, you should, otherwise, if you don't have substitution, you should return the unit back to service on time as planned, and then try to plan an outage on a different date.
Thanks, Abdullah. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think I do have a little bit more of a nuanced scenario, but I can save it and work with one of our reps.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, we're going to move on because we do have another topic to talk about. So we're going to, and we have a couple other scenarios here as well. So a substitute, actually I think this is the last one, a substitute resource takes a planned outage. So you have resource K that had a planned outage. Resource L is the approved substitute resource to cover for resource K's RA obligation. So now resource L is responsible for that RA obligation. Our resource L needs to take a planned outage, so now they are going to submit an outage in OMS, and they need to find a substitute to cover 100% of their obligation, and then that will be approved. So once you hand it off to the substitute resource, when the substitute resource, if it needs to take a planned outage, then the obligation is on SC for resource L, and the original resource K, is off the hook. I'm going to skip this, but we'll stop for questions one more time. So this initiative covers planned outages only, not forced. When this initiative was put into place, the definitions of planned and forced outages were not changed ultimately, so they're just the same as they have been. And resources taking outages due to transmission outages and off-peak outages are exempt. Now, there's going to be a PRR that's going to update the BPM on that with more information. So take a look when that comes out. Take a look at that. Some other key points: substitutions are made in SIRA by the SC for the resource. The LSC's scheduling coordinator is not impacted by this at all. It doesn't impact their RA plan at all. Note that internal generators are the only ones that can be used as substitutes, planned outage substitutions. And for settlements, if an outage is denied and resource does not meet its must-offer obligation, then there could be RAIM penalties. So if a planned outage is only partially covered by substitution, the outage is going to be denied. And once a resource is shown as a substitute, now their scheduling coordinator has the obligations as an RA resource. So I'm going to stop for questions here. Michelle, any questions?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, as a reminder, #2 will enter you into the phone question queue. I currently do not see any questions in queue.
All right. We're going to move on. The rest of this should go, I think, fairly quickly. In the way that you're going to see your validation screen is in City. So you use the existing planned outage substitution screen to submit substitutions. If you want to see the RA validation, you would click on View Results and select RACS_calc. That's Resource Adequacy Capacity Substitution. You'll get a screen that looks like this, and this is actually one long screen, but I couldn't fit it on the slide, so this is all on the same screen. I just wanted to make it big enough so you could see it. And you'll click on View Results to see the details of that RA capacity substitution assignment. And the screen will look like this. So you're going to be able to view the assignment details, It's going to show you the megawatts as well as the current status of the substitution. As it says here, the status will update automatically as soon as the substitution is provided. So this is a screen you're going to want to look at to see if your substitution is covered. I believe, I'm going to just check. Yep, that is my last slide. So any final questions on this?
We do have a question in queue. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Hello, this is Dennis Smayed and CPA. Considering the fact that transmission-induced outages are exempt from any rain penalties, if, let's say, PG&E has a planned transmission-induced outage, would it be possible to work with PG&E to try to get those planned out as soon as possible? That way we could try to take advantage of that and conduct our maintenance if it only takes 1, 2, 3 days. Hello?
Hello. Can someone help with that answer? I'm not sure. I think that'll be outlined in the PRR for the BPM. But does anyone have an answer for that right now?
Sorry, this is Abdul. Can you say that one more time? I didn't hear the full question.
Yeah. So since it sounds like it's going to be really difficult to schedule planned outages, especially if a forced outage occurs, could we take advantage of any planned transmission-induced generator outages by PG&E? And if you could work with them, try to get those planned out as soon as possible, so once we see those, we could try to take advantage of those outage dates and conduct some maintenance, whether it's 1, 2, or 3 days within that time frame.
Yeah, okay. You mean once you learn about transmission work that is going to take your unit out, you're saying take advantage of that situation because your unit is already out and transmission-induced generation outages are exempt from this process. So you want to, you take advantage of the situation and do your maintenance work. Is that what you're saying?
That is correct.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a good idea. You could do it today. You could do it tomorrow. The one thing to keep in mind is sometimes the transmission work gets moved, or sometimes it gets shifted or ends earlier than expected. So just keep that in mind. If you'll still need to put an outage for your unit for your work. So if you're doing maintenance work on your unit, you need a separate outage for it. But because your unit is probably going to be already fully derated, fully out of service because of the transmission work, your planned maintenance work won't be impacted here. We'll see zero derate caused by your planned maintenance, so we're not going to consume it in this process and assess it substitution. But the benefit of having the outage card is it protects you in case the transmission gets moved or ends sooner. You can keep working on your unit, but obviously if that happens, then now you need substitution if the transmission work gets moved from your time frame.
Oh, all right. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. And while I'm at it, someone from the chat said, does the CAISO deny forced outages? We don't deny forced outages, so, generally speaking, we don't do that. So hope that answers it.
Yep. I also noticed, yes, I meant Sierra and not city in my screens here. These are Sierra screens, not city screens, so we'll fix that on the slide. Sorry about that. Are there other questions?
Let's see. I think we might have another question in queue. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Hey, this is Anthony Dito again, PG. A question regarding off-peak opportunity outages. Previously, those mainly applied to solar at night outages, and that was the understanding with CAISO. Is CAISO going to be granting those now for non-solar resources that are trying to schedule outages during these, quote, off-peak times? It seems in the past, solar at night outages that were under that definition of off-peak opportunity didn't risk denial for any reason, but other outages were not submitted in that fashion because it wasn't a guarantee that they would be okayed. Is CAISO changing the way they look at solar at night? Is CAISO changing the way they look at off-peak opportunity as it applies to all resources now, or is that strictly still just solar resources?
Yeah, hi, Anthony. We're going to apply it to all resources as long as they follow the rules in the BPM for an off-peak opportunity outage.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
I do not see any additional questions in queue at this time.
Okay. Well, let's see. I think that if it's okay with Radha, I think she needs just about, well, we may have questions. So why don't we go through, I'm going to hand it over to Radha to do her presentation, and then if there's time at the end, maybe we can come back to some of these chat questions. Okay? So I am going to hand this to Radha now.
Sounds good. Thank you, Cindy. And I'll just tell you next slide when we need to move to the next one because you've got the presentation running for speed. So, folks, we're going to move to a new topic as part of the RA Enhancements Phase 1 program, and that's the minimum state of charge requirement. Cindy, if you could move slides. Some key points on this topic. We are implementing a restriction on the state of charge, and we're going to be managing it through a new tool called the minimum state of charge, or MSOC requirement. This applies to RA resources only. This is a temporary solution that will have a sunset provision of 2 years after implementation because we will be replacing it with a market-based solution. And this MSOC requirement will only be used under certain conditions when we have RUC in feasibility in the day ahead. And I'll walk through the slides with you and we'll explain how we'll communicate when those RUC in feasibility hours are identified and when we'll be implementing the min SOC requirement. Next slide, please. Just a little background for you on the implementation. We're expecting about 1,800 megawatts of storage capacity to be available to provide resource adequacy by August of this year. Right now we have about 550 megawatts of storage that's available for RA capacity. So this min SOC requirement will ensure that we have state of charge availability for those evening peak periods. And again, this is not going to be a permanent requirement. We will have a new energy storage enhancements initiative that we will begin in Q2 of this year, where we will be developing a market-based tool to procure this state of charge from storage resources and provide compensation for that product. When that new initiative is being developed, it will apply both to non-RA storage as well as RA. So this piece here, the min SOC requirement, again, is only for these RA resources. Next slide, please. And so the question here is, what is the purpose of the min SOC? If we could go to slide 40. The reason why we're implementing this is that in the day-ahead market time frame, we have commitments that are not immutable, meaning we can adjust and undo them in the real-time market. In real time, we're sending dispatch instructions to these resources based on prevailing market prices and resource bids, and we're not essentially considering those day-ahead schedules. And in the real-time planning horizon, we're looking out about 65 minutes, but most storage resources take several hours to fully charge, whereas if you contrast this with the day-ahead market 24-hour planning horizon, this allows us to optimize these storage resources over that entire 24-hour time horizon, which allows for the management of both the charge and the discharge at optimum times and also prices. Next slide, please. The goal of this min SOC requirement is to make sure that these storage resources that are providing RA capacity are sufficiently charged in real time to meet those day-ahead discharge schedules that have been optimized across that full 24-hour planning horizon in those situations where storage resources are needed to meet that evening net load peak. Next slide, please. So if we get to, page 42, we will only be applying these min SOC requirements on days where the needs are critical. So we're going to use the results from the day-ahead RUC, or residual unit commitment process, to determine those days when the minimum state of charge requirement will be applied.
Sorry, my apologies.
It's okay. Yeah, here we are, 42. All right. So minimums will only be imposed on those days when RUC is infeasible, which is something that happens very infrequently, but it does indicate that we have tight system conditions. So our control room operators will have further opportunity to drop those requirements in real time if the conditions are different in the real-time market. Next slide, please. We have designed these requirements to reduce as much as possible the impact to storage. So the min SOC requirement will be implemented in the real-time market that will set a minimum threshold state of charge for each of those RA storage resources that have a day-ahead discharge award. We will determine a series of critical hours. Those hours will be determined by operations, and those will be the only hours that this requirement is imposed. And I say a series of critical hours to indicate that this is a continuous time window, meaning it doesn't go on or off throughout the day. It is a specific set range of hours that are going to be identified as critical hours. And coming up, I have some slides that will show you an example of the reports that you will see in OASIS that identify these hours and also the RUC and feasibility. So we will only be imposing these minimums on the hours directly prior to those discharge schedules and not in hours earlier in the day. And in real time, we will optimally schedule those storage resources to either charge or to hold your state of charge to meet those requirements. Next slide, please. So let's talk about those reports. This is how you will know when we're going to be calling those min SOC requirements. In the day-ahead time frame, we will report the following for the next trade day, only for those trade days that have non-zero RUC under gen and feasibility for at least one trade hour. So if there's a trade date that has at least 1 hour where we have RUC in feasibility, you'll see this report on OASIS. It will show you the critical hours that we're going to use to calculate that minimum end of hour state of charge requirement. And it will also show you those RUC infeasible hours and the associated megawatts with those hours. We will not publish this report for trade days that have 0 RUC under gen and feasibilities. So in the day ahead time frame, we're looking at 24 hours. If we have at least 1 hour where RUC is infeasible, you'll see this report. If there are 0 hours that fall into that criteria, this report will not be published for that trade date. Next slide, please, and we'll take a look at an example of what that report will look like. So this is a sample. It's a preliminary report mock-up. The final report may vary. As you can see, this is essentially just an Excel table that I've made look a little fancy. This is an example OASIS report, and the purpose of this report is to identify the RUC infeasible hours and also show you the critical hours that were set by operations. I've marked the RUC infeasible hours here in orange, hour ending 18, and then 20, 21, and 22. And I'm also pointing out that you can see the critical hour flag as a yes or no. And those critical hours might be different from those RUC infeasibility hours. The critical hours are when we are going to apply the min SOC requirement. Those critical hours are always going to be a range of hours, and so you will see that on the report here. You'll also notice that there is a column that right now is empty that has a timestamp for when we may deactivate this requirement in real time. So this report comes out in the day-ahead time frame. After the market results publish, if we have any hours with rough infeasibility, you will see this report in the day-ahead time frame. Next slide, please. Now, if we are going to deactivate the min SOC requirement during real time, then we are going to update that day-ahead report with the date and time of global deactivation of enforcement of binding min SOC in real time. So we will deactivate and we will share with you the timestamp on that report. So next slide, please, and you can take a look at that. I see a question in the chat asking why is a certain title in a column not labeled one certain thing. Good question. Like I said, this is a mock-up that was generated for OASIS. The final report might look a little different. This is the best information that I have at this point. So when the report developers finalize it, it's possible that those column headers will change. I don't know, but this is the mock-up that I have at this time. So what you'll see here is if we cancel the min SOC requirement in the real-time time frame, we will update this day-ahead report with the timestamp of when we deactivated it. So in this example, we deactivated the min SOC requirement for hour ending 14. So the report gets updated with the date and time of the deactivation, so you will see that that timestamp hits when we cancel it, and then it goes through the rest of the trade hours for that day. I also want to point out that it does not change the day-ahead data that was in the RUC and feasibility hours and megawatts and which hours were marked as critical flags. So that data stays the same to preserve historical information, but you will see the timestamp of when we cancel that here. And moving on to the next slide, which will answer your question in the chat about when the min SOC will be applied. We're only going to apply the min SOC for storage with day-ahead schedules during those critical hours and possibly leading up to those critical hours so that you could be available. So the report that you see in OASIS is market-wide, letting you know which hours were infeasible and what the set of critical hours are. You will receive resource-specific information in CMRI in the day-ahead time frame that will tell you what your min SOC is going to be in those hours in the critical hour range and possibly leading up to that range. So we're going to publish in CMRI your individual resource information that will give you your binding minimum end-of-hour SOC requirements that are generated by the day-ahead market if they are more restrictive than what your current lower state of charge limit is, which is listed in master file, plus we'll take a look at any existing outages. So this report is going to come out in the day-ahead time frame, and I do want to note that we don't update this report if we deactivate the min SOC in real time. Again, this is a day-ahead schedule, so this data remains the same for historical purposes, which means you're going to have to pay attention to that OASIS report to know if the min SOC requirement gets canceled, and you may also notice that it gets canceled if your ADS instructions start to stray or be different from the CMRI report. So take a look at the next slide. Cindy, if you'll change to page 49. This example is going to be your binding minimum end-of-hour state of charge requirement. Again, this is a preliminary report mock-up. What the final report looks like might vary slightly. You will see these reports during market simulation, and they may look a little different from these screenshots that we've got here, but this gives you a flavor of what it would look like. If you have a minimum end-of-hour SOC that is more restrictive than what your current limits are, you will see those shown on this report. So what I mean by that is if we take a look at the first line, hour ending 16, which has a min SOC of 30 megawatts. If 30 megawatts is already your current existing min SOC, that particular trade hour would not be shown on this report. So this report is only going to show you when your SOC is more restrictive than current parameters, indicating that we're kind of possibly be working you up to holding a state of charge to be able to provide for that day-ahead schedule. So let me take a moment here to pause and look in the chat for any questions. Will a min SOC be applied for all store? Okay, I answered that question. Only through the critical hours. It won't be for earlier hours of the day. The next question is, what about resources that have a day-ahead schedule that begins in the middle of the critical hours? Let's say critical hours are hour ending 18 to 22, and my storage has a day-ahead schedule of 19 to 23. So it will apply, but depending on where you are at your state of charge and what we need you to be to meet that day-ahead schedule could possibly provide you with an adjustment to that min state of charge, let's say in the hour or two leading up to that. So you will have, it will essentially depend on how we plan to charge you up in order to meet that day-ahead schedule. Depending on the situation, and you'll possibly see further detail of this in the business practice, or I'm sorry, in the business requirements document, there's essentially a parameter that can be adjusted by operations, the attenuation parameter, that essentially allows us to spread that charging ramp across a longer time period. Normally it's 100%, but we could be adjusting that to manage reliability. So the point I'm trying to get across is that leading up to that peak ramp where we need you, it's possible that we will charge you up over a longer period than normal so that we don't stress already tight supply conditions. If that were to occur, you would see that here in the report. There was a question about the 65 minutes. Is that the non-binding solution? Yes. So what we're talking about there is how it works today in real time, essentially when we're in the real-time market process. In the 15-minute market, we're looking through this trade hour and the following trade hour. So that's our planning horizon in that 15-minute market time frame. We're wanting to be able to use the day-ahead schedule across a longer planning horizon in real time to hold resources at a state of charge if we're going to be needing them to meet that, essentially that net peak load, which is why we're only going to do it in certain situations when we're in a ruck and feasibility. So with that, I'm going to move to page 50, if you would. And we'll pause here and ask for any verbal questions. I think we've hit everything in the chat. So Michelle, if anybody has any verbal questions, if we could go to those now.
Absolutely. We do have questions in queue. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask a question. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question. Please do unmute your phone or device. All right. We are moving to the next question in the queue. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Hello. This is Alvis Svoboda at PG&E. I really appreciate the additional detail and presentation of what the reports might look like in this training. Thank you very much for that. I did have a couple of just clarifying questions. One is, you had, by the way, you can hear me, can't you?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. You had said that the lower charge limit was going to be set, the you would only show a more binding level if it was above the lower charge limit in the master file, but there's also a lower charge limit that's set in the bids, and I'm hoping you would show anything that was more binding than what was put in the bids. Was that just were you misspeaking there, or would you not show it if the lower charge limit used in the bids was above the master file lower charge limit?
I imagine the bids would apply as well. When I was going over this example with the SME, we were discussing master file. Do I have someone on the line that can address that for me?
If not, you can just park that question.
Yeah, I'll double check on that. I assume, just like you were assuming, that obviously we would respect the bid as well. The point was that we wanted to get across with that example was saying, we're going to show you what your min SOC is if it's more restrictive than what it currently is today, for example, by master file or any existing outages. So the fact that we're looking at both master file and outages, the market will also have bid information. I'll clarify that to make sure, but I'm pretty sure that bids apply as well.
Thank you. Second question is, will market participants be eligible for bid cost recovery when charging uneconomically due to the minimum state of charge requirement?
Do I have a SME who knows the answer to that question?
Hey, Alva. Yeah, this is Gabe. I can try to address that question. So today, the storage resources will have the same BCR treatment as other resources, and that would apply, unless there's an exceptional dispatch or something like that, the typical BCR rules will apply for storage resources during this period. So in the event that you were charging at a price that was different than your bid and you were uneconomic, you would get, or you could potentially get BCR per the existing BCR rules, which of course are summed up over a 24-hour period during that day. We realize that this is not, potentially an optimal solution for storage resources, and that's one of the reasons why we've asked that this authority only be used on the most limited number of days when systems are the absolute tightest, so these ruck and feasible days. And then we've also asked that this particular provision sunset over the next 2 years while we can develop a market-based solution which will include specific compensation for resources that are providing this as a service, holding state of charge and making it available to the ISO later in the day, which we plan to develop through the Energy Storage Enhancements Initiative. And we should be publishing a issue paper on that before the end of the month.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer. It's a great answer, Gabe. The one thing obviously I'd expect the Department of Market Monitoring would pay attention to, because you're publishing this constraint the day before, potentially market participants could change their bids after being notified in such a way as to take advantage of bid cost recovery. So we'd want to at least have the Department of Market Monitoring looking at that kind of behavior.
You're absolutely correct, Alva. We've had a number of conversations with both the Department of Market Monitoring and our own internal market validations team. They will certainly be looking for that sort of, non-competitive behavior. Yes, exactly. And they can, flag people and contact them and potentially refer them if they find something that's,
right.
an issue.
My last question is, this is a use case we've encountered. So the one thing that does worry me a little bit, but maybe you can advise as to what we would want to do, is so currently if state of charge telemetry is lost, we don't treat that as an outage on a battery. We can still schedule our day ahead. We can still adhere to our day ahead schedules, and there's no issue. We may not bid in real time because obviously we can't be reliably dispatched, but we may still, schedule a resource based on our day-ahead schedules, which is exactly what you're looking for. However, an effect of telemetry loss is currently that you treat the state of charge as 0, and so that means both that you would tend to send out spurious charging instructions to get the unit to a minimum state of charge, but more worryingly, you would not allow the resource to discharge during the peak hours. And I'm just wondering whether you would prefer that we actually take the battery out under those circumstances, or which would be counterproductive to the original intent, or what would you think the solution would be in that case, where because you don't have correct telemetry, you are bound to dispatch incorrectly to the minimum state of charge constraint?
Yeah, Alva, I think that's a really good question, and I think you're right. We probably could use a little bit more, of course, as we get more experience with actually operating storage resources and some of the nuances that are applicable to storage and maybe not traditional generation. I think there's a learning curve there for the ISO and market participants. But for this one specifically, I know it has been escalated to our teams internally, and they have been thinking about it. But I think we should probably circle back internally and generate a more formal answer before answering off the cuff on this call.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Alva.
All right. I do not see any additional questions in queue, but as a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, #2 will enter you into the question queue.
All right, addressing a couple of questions in the chat. There was a question about bugs or inaccuracies in the past in the non-binding solution. In real time, I'm not super familiar with what that is, so not sure of the answer to that question. And there was another question that asked, at a high level, can this be thought of as a flavor of exceptional dispatch? I don't know, Gabe, if you want to weigh in on that. I'm not sure. Is that what we would call this, or do we want to call this something else?
No, I think we certainly wouldn't call this an exceptional dispatch. I think, it has some attributes that are similar to an exceptional dispatch, but, as I said in response to the bid cost recovery question, this is not going to be compensated as exceptional dispatch. It's going to be compensated under the normal settlement processes, which include potentially bid cost recovery, which is aggregated over a 24-hour period. We will be addressing exceptional dispatch for storage resources in the new Energy Storage Enhancements Initiative, so that will be one other item to kind of look for and think about there. And I do think in that initiative, we will be thinking specifically about exceptional dispatches when we tell a storage resource to move to a state of charge, megawatt hour value, and how that gets compensated, which likely would include some kind of opportunity cost compensation in addition to the typical charging and discharging costs if those are uneconomic.
Okay, thanks, Gabe. And then there was a question that asked for more clarity on the difference between advisory and binding min SOC mentioned in the RA Enhancements BRS. Michael, if you would do me a favor on that one, and you can send an email to customerreadiness@CAISO.com and identify for me which business requirements that you're talking about. I can make sure to take a look at that and possibly include some more clarity on this. We're actually going to discuss storage again when we do our Summer Readiness Part 1 training, which is going to be Tuesday, April 27th. So we will actually revisit this set of slides that talks about min SOC along with the other storage-related items that we have. So, Michael, if you could send me a note on that, I can look to include that in that next session that we do on Tuesday, as we're running out of time for today. And Another question was about more clarity on the timeline for the Energy Store Enhancements Initiative. So that's something that we're going to be kicking off. And when we have more visibility on that, you'll actually see a stakeholder initiative pop up and be set up separately, and there'll be calls on that. So right now I understand it's going to be Q2 2021, and if there's any change to that, do I have a SME that possibly knows more on that?
Yeah, I would just chime in here. This is Gabe again. Just chime in here that, we are currently planning to take energy storage enhancements to the Board of Governors for final approval in December with a final package of proposals. I think, people here at the ISO would say that that's an aggressive timetable. We're trying to balance the need for improved functionality for storage resources with, allowing for enough time for stakeholders to review and vet the policy. I think, on this current timeline that we have allows for that, but it is on the shorter end of, the time that we could take for this initiative, so we could potentially extend it as well. We'll certainly have a formal timeline laid out with specific dates on it at our stakeholder call to cover the issue paper that we're publishing in, like I said, just a few weeks. And then, we will be getting into some more of those details on that call.
Okay, thanks, Gabe. All right, and just to follow back up on the last item where we talked about possibly inaccuracies in a non-binding solution, I believe that was referring to the multi-interval optimization, and that has been worked out and is working as designed now. So, David, to answer your question, that has been fixed. And now we're going to move on to the last little bit of slides here. Next slide, please. And we're going to go over market simulation. Page 52, if you could move forward to that, Cindy. We are going to be doing market sim for this RA Enhancements Initiative along with the other Summer Readiness 2021 initiatives. This market simulation provides you, the customer, the ability to preview and test our functionality from bid to bill. We ask that if you're going to participate in the RA Enhancements Market Sim, that you complete your registration for structured scenarios by April 26th, which is this Monday. And you identify that you want to participate by sending an email to marketsim@kaisa.com. Next slide, please. These last couple slides I'll go over just briefly because you can read about them additionally in the market sim scenarios. So we have 5 different scenarios that we're going to be doing as part of the RA enhancements piece. The first one addresses fully covered substitution. So you'll recall at the beginning of this presentation, Cindy went over the variety of examples. And so in Market Sim, we'll be doing the submission of outages, cross-validation, waiting for those substitution deadlines, and making sure that everything checks out and those outages aren't denied. You take next slide, please. Scenario number 2 is going to be done with less than full substitution. So you're going to go through the process there, and then in that situation, we're expecting that outages would be denied if you don't have that full 100% substitution. Next slide, please. We also have a situation that we're going to be testing in an unstructured way for an outage that has already started and can't be extended. Next slide, please. And then finally, we have scenarios addressing the binding min SOC requirements. So we're going to have a situation where there's at least 1 hour of RUC and feasibility so that you can take a look at both the individual CMRI reports and the OASIS reports to see those RUC and feasible hours and what the critical hours were, and then how that affects your individual resources. And then you'll be able to see the settlement statements and what that would look like for that situation. Next slide, please. And then we're going to deactivate the min SOC requirement in the real-time time frame, and you'll be able to take a look at how that affects your settlement for that particular day and you'll also see the OASIS reports that cancel that min SOC requirement. Next slide, please. So we have reached the end of today's session. Does anybody have any final questions before we conclude?
Once again, ladies and gentlemen, pressing pound 2 on your telephone keypad will enter you into the question queue. All right. I do not see any questions in the question queue, and I don't see any additional chats either, but there are definitely no questions in the audio queue, in the phone queue.
All right, next slide, please. So as Cindy indicated, we are going to make a little bit of an update to this presentation and repost it. Today, you can see it on both the RA Enhancements Initiative page and also our Learning Center under New Modules. We'll update that with a little bit more info like we talked about. And if you have any questions, you can send an email to Customer Readiness. Cindy, before we close the call, I'll hand it over to you if you wanted to have any closing statements or add any additional items.
No, I do want to thank everybody for their time and their patience while we had our technical difficulties. I'm glad we did get through the entire presentation. And again, we're not going to ignore all the questions in the chat. We will either send out an email or we'll post something probably on the website with all of your questions and the answers. So I apologize for the technical difficulties, but we got through it, and I really appreciate all your great questions. So thank you very much.
All right, that concludes our conference. Thank you for using Event Services, and you may now disconnect.